She ran to the hospital when she heard about her husband's accident, but froze when she discovered who was with him in the car. That night, Laura just wanted to believe that fate was being cruel and not fair. But the truth is that, as she rushed through the sterile corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, a part of her already knew with the cold certainty that settles in the pit of the stomach when intuition, ignored for so long, finally screams. The sound of sirens outside seemed like a distant echo of the alarm blaring inside her, a cacophony of fear, and a terrible suspicion she'd been pushing to the back of her mind for months. The smell of antiseptic invaded her nostrils, but it couldn't cleanse the feeling that something much dirtier was about to be revealed. She gripped the strap of her purse tightly, her knuckles turning white. The nurse's uniform, which normally gave her a sense of purpose and control, now felt like a fragile costume, unable to protect her from what was coming. Each step toward the reception desk was a step toward an abyss she felt opening beneath her feet. The receptionist, a young man with tired eyes and an air of someone who'd seen it all, looked up without much interest. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His voice was monotonous, a cruel counterpoint to the urgency tearing at Laura's chest. "David Thompson," she said, her voice coming out more tremulous than intended. "He was admitted car accident less than an hour ago." His name, which for 10 years had been synonymous with home, security, a life built together, now sounded strange in her own mouth, like a word from a forgotten language. The young man typed the name into the system, the sound of the keys echoing in the tense silence of the waiting room. "Yes, he's in the ER, room 3. The doctor will speak with the family soon." Family. The word hit her like a punch. What kind of family were they still? A union held together by habits, shared silences, and the comfortable inertia of time. A facade that, she feared, was about to crumble spectacularly. Laura didn't sit down. She remained standing, a statue of anxiety in the middle of the hallway, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stared at the ER door as if she could see through it, as if her willpower could rewrite whatever was happening inside. Each minute dragged on with the slowness of torture. People passed by, nurses rushed. The sound of heart monitors created a constant and anguishing soundtrack, and then the door opened. A doctor, tall and with a serious expression, came out, looking for someone in the hallway. Laura stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat. "Doctor, I'm David Thompson's wife." The doctor looked at her with compassion, that professional gaze that tries to soften the blow before it's even delivered. "Mrs. Thompson, your husband is stable, but what made her stop wasn't what the doctor said. It was what she saw. Passing behind him, pushed by 2 hurried orderlies, another gurney followed down the hallway. On it, lying with a cut on her forehead, was Jessica Miller, the friendly neighbor from apartment 702, 2 floors below. The woman who always smiled in the elevator, who asked for a cup of sugar and complimented Laura's perfume. The same Jessica who, 3 days ago, said Laura's husband was a gentleman for helping her change a tire. Hurt, but unmistakably alive. Laura's world tilted on its axis. The air grew thin, the voices around her turned into an indistinct buzz. The doctor continued talking about fractures and observation, but his words didn't reach her. The only truth that mattered was there, lying on that gurney, the living proof of a betrayal that she, in her deliberate denial, had refused to see. They were rescued together, in the same car, in the same front seat. The ground didn't just disappear beneath Laura's feet, it disintegrated, leaving her in free fall into the vacuum of her own naivety. Her face didn't contort in anger, didn't dissolve into tears. Instead, a mask of cold calm settled over her features. It was the kind of calm that precedes the greatest earthquakes of the soul. It was understanding, the kind of understanding that doesn't shout but burns inside, silent and devastating, incinerating everything that was once sacred. She finally understood David's late dinners, the last-minute business trips, the subtle distancing he disguised with fatigue. Understood Jessica's kind smiles, the way her eyes always seemed to search for something or someone beyond Laura. The puzzle pieces, once scattered and meaningless, now fit together with brutal precision, forming the grotesque image of her double life. In that hospital hallway, under the cold and impersonal light of fluorescent bulbs, Laura was no longer a worried wife. She was a spectator, a witness to the accident that didn't just involve twisted metal, but the head-on collision of her life with a carefully constructed lie. And for the first time, she wondered if what hurt most was the betrayal itself, or her own refusal to admit that the signs had always been there, flashing an alert, while she chose to close her eyes and believe in the tranquility of a sea that beneath the surface hid a treacherous whirlpool. 3 months before the sound of twisting metal and the smell of burning rubber, the Thompsons' life was defined by a dangerously deceptive word: tranquility. To friends, family, to the other residents of the upscale condo building where they lived in Chicago, Laura and David were the picture of stability. A 10-year marriage, without the dramas and volcanic passions of youth, but with the apparent solidity of a fortress built on the rock of time. But Laura knew deep in her soul that the foundation wasn't rock, but sand. A fine and shifting sand, giving way slowly, grain by grain, with every dinner consumed in silence, every good night said without a kiss, every glance that averted too quickly. Their tranquility wasn't peace. It was the absence of conflict, the void left by a war neither had the courage to declare. She worked as a head nurse in a private clinic, a profession that demanded from her a daily dose of empathy, precision, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. Ironically, the same qualities that made her exemplary at her job paralyzed her in her marriage. She analyzed the symptoms of their relationship with the same clinical rationality: the fever of indifference, the slow hemorrhage of intimacy, the atrophy of communication. She diagnosed the disease but found herself unable to apply the treatment, perhaps out of fear that the cure would require a painful amputation. David, on the other hand, was an accountant at an auditing firm. A man of numbers, spreadsheets, cold and controlled logic. He managed life like he managed his clients' finances, with efficiency, detachment, and an aversion to emotional variables. The overtime at the office became the standard excuse, an impenetrable shield against Laura's increasingly rare attempts to reconnect. "I'm exhausted, Laura. The quarter-end close is killing me," he'd say. And the phrase, repeated to exhaustion, lost its meaning to become just a sound, the soundtrack of their estrangement. The dinners were the most painful ritual. Seated at the solid wood dining table they'd chosen together years before, in a time when the future seemed a shared project, the only sound was the clink of silverware against porcelain plates. It was a dense, heavy silence, full of unspoken words and unasked questions. Laura sometimes tried to fill it with trivialities about her day, about a difficult patient or a funny colleague, but David's responses were monosyllabic, his eyes fixed on some vague point beyond her. He wasn't cruel, not actively. His cruelty was passive, a neglect that corroded more than any direct offense. He was present in body, but his mind, his soul, had long withdrawn to a place where Laura had no access. She felt like an astronaut floating in space, with the tether to the mothership cut, watching it drift away slowly and inexorably until it became just a point of light in a vast, cold darkness. The only link that still bound them was habit, the gravitational force of routine that kept them orbiting each other, even when the planets of their inner lives were already light years apart. And then there was Jessica. Jessica Miller was like an exotic and vibrant flower planted in a concrete garden. She'd moved into the building about a year ago, a divorced woman, no kids, with a smile that seemed permanently glued to her face and a friendliness that bordered on excess. She was the opposite of Laura. Where Laura was reserved and observant, Jessica was expansive and performative. Her blonde hair was always impeccably styled, her clothes always colorful and fitted, her perfume always sweet and noticeable from yards away. She appeared in the hallways, the elevator, the garage, always with a studied kindness, a neutral phrase that in retrospect would sound like a provocation. "Your husband is so polite, Laura. He always helps me with the groceries. A real gentleman," she'd say, her eyes sparkling. Or, "I saw David in the garage this morning. He gave me a ride to the mechanic. His car is so comfortable." Laura, conditioned to see the best in people, just smiled back. Their polite, automatic smile, never imagining the scale and sordidness hidden behind those seemingly innocent phrases. She saw Jessica as a helpful neighbor, perhaps a bit lonely, and felt a twinge of compassion for her. Little did she know that the compassion should have been saved for herself. Some marriages don't end with the bang of a slamming door. They end with the whisper of too many kindnesses from the wrong people. The betrayal didn't announce itself with shouts and accusations, but infiltrated silently, disguised as friendship, cordiality, and innocent help in the parking lot. David, the man who barely had energy to ask Laura about her day, seemed to have an inexhaustible stock of chivalry for the neighbor in 702. The energy missing at home overflowed 2 floors below. Laura felt the change but couldn't name it. It was like feeling a cold draft in a closed room. You don't know where it's coming from, but you feel the chill on your skin, the premonition that something is open, broken, exposed. She attributed David's distance to stress, midlife crisis, anything that didn't force her to confront the most painful possibility. Denial is a powerful survival mechanism, an anesthetic that allows the soul to keep functioning even when the heart is being slowly torn apart. In a desperate attempt to revive the inert body of their marriage, Laura brought up kids again. The idea, which they'd discussed and postponed early in the relationship, resurfaced as a last resort, a defibrillator for a heart that was stopping. "David, I've been thinking, maybe now's the time," she said one night, as he loosened his tie, his eyes already glazed on the TV screen. A bigger house, a yard, a baby. She watched his face, searching for a glimpse of enthusiasm, connection, anything. But his expression remained closed, impenetrable. "It's not the time, Laura," he replied, his voice devoid of any emotion. "With this economy, the office demanding everything from me, it would be crazy." The refusal was so quick, so categorical, that it hurt more than a slap. It wasn't a discussion, it was a decree. And in that moment, a small part of Laura's hope withered and died. Back then, she still believed love was like a broken bone that with patience, cast and time could mend, become strong again. She hadn't yet understood that some loves don't break. They dissolve, rot from within, until nothing remains but a hollow shell, ready to crumble at the first touch. The car accident wasn't the touch. It was the final sledgehammer. Back in the caustic present of the hospital hallway, time seemed to have folded in on itself. The glimpse of Jessica being wheeled away, the memory of fake smiles and poisoned kindnesses, all fused into a single, lacerating epiphany. The doctor was still there, speaking in a professional and compassionate tone about David's condition. Multiple fractures in the left leg, a mild concussion, but he's conscious and out of danger. But his voice was background noise, the static of an old radio, while the true music, a funereal symphony, played inside Laura's head. She nodded mechanically, her eyes empty, fixed on a spot on the white wall. The nurse in her registered the clinical information, but the woman, the wife, was elsewhere, floating over the wreckage of her life, observing the scene with a terrible and dispassionate clarity. She felt a strange duality, as if her body was there, firm and upright, while her consciousness detached, becoming a cold spectator of her own cataclysm. "Mrs. Thompson, would you like to see him? He's a bit sedated, but he might recognize you," the doctor suggested, with the delicacy of someone offering a glass of water to a person just sentenced. Laura hesitated for a microsecond. Seeing David now would mean confronting the man, the lie, the betrayal personified in a broken body. It would mean having to pretend, to enact the role of the devoted and relieved wife, a role that had turned to ashes in her mouth. "Not yet," she replied, her voice surprisingly firm, devoid of any tremor. "I need a moment. I can wait out here." Before the doctor could insist, she turned with a calm she didn't feel and asked a passing nurse, "Excuse me, the belongings of the patient in room 3, David Thompson, where can I pick them up?" The question was practical, functional, a reflex of her mind trained to follow protocols. But beneath that facade of efficiency, there was a visceral and dark need. The need for proof, for confirmation, to touch the materiality of the betrayal that until then had been just a feeling, a shadow. The admissions clerk, a middle-aged woman with an air of bureaucratic boredom, handed her a large transparent plastic bag, sealed with an identification label. Inside lay the mundane artifacts of David's life, now transformed into relics of a parallel existence. The worn leather wallet, the wristwatch with the cracked glass from the impact, a set of keys, and lastly the cell phone, a modern smartphone, with the screen shattered in a spiderweb pattern but still functional. Laura took the bag and walked to a more isolated corner of the waiting room, sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair that felt as hard and cold as the reality engulfing her. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal and picked up the device. It was the epicenter of everything, the black box containing the records of the disaster, the final seconds before the collision of the lie with the truth. She held it, the cold metal and broken glass against her palm, feeling the symbolic weight of that object. She hesitated. A part of her, the part that still yearned for the peace of ignorance, screamed for her to put it away, not to look, to cling to the last thread of possible denial. But it was fate itself with its cruel irony that made the decision for her. As Laura stared at the dark screen, the device vibrated in her hand, an electric buzz that seemed to run up her arm and hit her heart. The cracked screen lit up, illuminating her pale face with a ghostly light, and there at the top of the lock screen, a message notification appeared, clear and unequivocal, like an epitaph for her marriage. Message from Jessica. I'm here. Bring the wine. The yellow heart next to the name was a detail so banal, so everyday and yet so obscene. It was the punctuation of an intimacy that didn't belong to her, a cheerful symbol for the darkest of betrayals. The blood seemed to drain from Laura's face, leaving behind a polar cold. The air escaped her lungs in a silent hiss. There was no more room for doubt, for interpretation, for the benefit of the doubt she'd granted David so many times. The proof was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact, illuminated in pixels and sealed with an emoji. With rigid fingers, moved by a morbid automatism, she pressed her thumb on the fingerprint sensor. The device, still recognizing David's print, unlocked instantly, opening a portal to the private hell he'd built right under her nose. The messaging app opened, revealing a history of conversations stretching back months. They were hundreds, maybe thousands of messages. Laura scrolled up, her thumb sliding over the broken glass, each new message a new cut to her soul. The conversations left no margin for doubt. There were photos exchanged in hotel rooms, audios with complicit laughs and whispers she'd never heard in her own home. There were meticulous plans for secret meetings, rehearsed excuses, business trips that were actually romantic getaways to coastal towns. There were promises. Promises from David that he would sort things out, that he needed just a little more time, that soon he'd tell Laura everything and they could finally be together. He described her to Jessica as a fragile woman, dependent, almost a sister he needed to care for, painting a distorted and humiliating portrait of the strong and independent woman Laura knew herself to be. She read it all, absorbing each word like a slow poison. The pain was so intense it transcended tears, transforming into an icy clarity, a silent fury that began to solidify in her chest. And then she reached the last exchange of messages, sent just minutes before the accident time recorded on the admission form. Jessica. Excited for today. It's our beginning. David's response, the last thing he typed before his world collided with someone else's on a dark road, was the most devastating phrase of all. Today is the day. She'll never know. The lie is in a hurry, and sometimes it crashes the car before reaching its destination. The irony was so brutal, so poetic in its cruelty, that a strange sound escaped Laura's throat, something between a dry sob and a humorless laugh. He was wrong. She knew. She knew everything. And the universe, in its mysterious and terrible justice, had ensured she knew in the most spectacular and public way possible. In that moment, as the entire hospital moved in a frantic effort to save David's life, Laura realized the only thing she needed to save was herself, her sanity, her dignity. whatever remained of her self-respect. The marriage had been dead for a long time. The accident had just signed the death certificate. What followed wasn't the drama those hospital walls were accustomed to witnessing. There were no screams tearing through the antiseptic-laden air, no accusations hurled like stones, nor the convulsive crying of a betrayed woman. What happened was much more potent, much more frightening in its quietude. Laura rose from the plastic chair, David's cell phone still in her hand, now a dead weight, a useless artifact. She moved with deliberate grace, each step measured and firm, as if walking on a thin layer of ice, aware that any sudden movement could plunge her into the icy waters of despair waiting just below. The fury, the pain, the humiliation, all those incandescent emotions didn't extinguish. Instead, they fused within her, forged by pressure into something new, a cold and unshakable resolve, hard as diamond. She wouldn't make a scene. Giving David and Jessica the spectacle of her suffering would be the final and ultimate humiliation. Her pain was hers, private and sacred in its agony, and she wouldn't turn it into entertainment for the hospital hallways. She found the same doctor as before, now talking to a nurse near the nursing station. He saw her approach and his expression softened into professional concern. "Mrs. Thompson, are you feeling better? Your husband is being transferred to a room on the 5th floor. He's awake, asking for you." The phrase, which hours earlier would have been a balm, now sounded like a bad joke. He was asking for her. The man who, minutes before almost dying, declared that she would never know about his double life, now requested her, as if she were a constant, a guaranteed safe harbor in his universe of lies. Laura just nodded, her face a mask of serenity. "Thank you, Doctor. I'm relieved he's out of danger," she said, her voice clear and without inflection. And then, she added the words that would seal the end of an era, spoken with the same calm as commenting on the weather. "He's going to need a lot of time to recover. So am I." The doctor stared at her, a wrinkle of confusion forming between his eyebrows. He sensed the subtext, the dissonance between her calm and the situation, but couldn't decipher the enigma. He attributed it to the strangeness of shock, without realizing he was witnessing not a collapse, but a coronation. The coronation of a queen who had just abdicated a kingdom in ruins. Laura didn't go to the 5th floor. Instead, she went down to the small flower shop in the hospital lobby, an oasis of color and life amid the sterility of the environment. Her eyes scanned the options, the red roses, symbol of a passion that had revealed itself a farce, the sunflowers, too cheerful for the occasion, the orchids, exotic and demanding like his lover. Her eyes landed finally on a bouquet of white lilies. Pure, elegant and imposing, the flowers of innocence, of majesty, and in some cultures the flowers that adorn funerals. The choice was instantaneous, instinctive. She paid for the bouquet and asked the vendor for a small card and a pen. With the firm handwriting she used to fill out medical charts, she wrote a single short phrase without signature, without farewell, without a drop of apparent emotion. "Take care of yourself, David. Like you never knew how to take care of me." Each letter was a nail in the coffin of their marriage. With the bouquet in one hand and the card in the other, she finally went up to the 5th floor. She stopped at the door of room 512, observing him from afar. David was lying down, his left leg suspended and casted, his face pale and scratched, his eyes closed under the effect of painkillers. For a fleeting instant, a pang of what had once been love hit her. The image of the man with whom she'd shared a decade, vulnerable and broken. But the feeling was quickly supplanted by the memory of the messages, the promises whispered to another woman, the entire life of lies. He wasn't a victim there. He was the architect of his own destruction. Without entering the room, she handed the flowers and note to a passing nurse. "Can you leave this on the bedside table for the patient, please?" From his wife. The nurse smiled, a complicit smile of someone seeing a gesture of love, and Laura returned it with a nod, the mask of normalcy perfectly in place. She didn't wait to see his reaction upon waking and reading the note. She didn't need to. The message wasn't for him, not really. It was for her. A declaration of her own liberation. As she turned and walked away from the room, The sound of the heart monitors that had once anguished her now seemed like a countdown to the start of her new life. Each step down the polished hallway was firm, resolute. She didn't look back. As she passed the nursing station, she overheard two nurses whispering. The woman from the accident, the one in 514, woke up asking for the man in 512. Said they were together. The hospital gossip, quick and merciless, was already weaving the tapestry of truth. Laura felt a shiver, but not of shame. It was confirmation that her decision was right. The scandal she had refused to make would happen anyway, but she wouldn't be there to be the humiliated protagonist. She would be far away, already in the first act of her own story. Some vows of love, made before an altar, end up in the same place where broken promises go, in the ER of truth. Laura walked out through the automatic doors of the hospital and breathed in the cold night air. The smell of the city, a mix of pollution and life, had never seemed so sweet, so full of possibilities. She was no longer Mrs. Thompson, the worried wife. She was just Laura. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. Laura's departure from the hospital wasn't the end of a night, but the end of a life. In the days that followed, she moved with the silent efficiency of a secret agent, dismantling an operation. There were no dramatic announcements, no angry phone calls to friends and family. She simply vanished from the life she'd built with David, with the subtlety of fog dissipating at dawn, leaving behind only the cold dampness of absence. While David recovered slowly in the hospital room, alternating between the physical pain of his injuries and the growing confusion caused by his wife's silence, Laura orchestrated her own liberation. She hired a moving company for an emergency weekend service, packing 10 years of life into cardboard boxes with cold and methodical determination. Each object, the picture frames with smiles frozen in time, the birthday gifts, the wedding china, was a ghost to be exorcised. She didn't cry. Tears seemed a luxury, an indulgence she couldn't afford. Instead, she channeled her pain into action, a kinetic energy that propelled her forward, preventing her from looking into the abyss that had opened behind her. In less than a week, the apartment she'd once called home was empty, except for David's furniture, and a silence that screamed louder than any accusation. She settled into a small rented apartment on the other side of the city, an impersonal and anonymous space that offered her the sanctuary she needed. At the same time, she requested a transfer at work. The clinic where she was head nurse was part of a hospital network, and she used her impeccable reputation and years of service to secure a position in the pediatrics unit of a larger hospital, a place where no one knew her married name, her history, her wound. Pediatrics was a conscious choice. Dealing with the fragility and resilience of children, with the pure hope and raw fear of their parents, was a way to reconnect with fundamental, genuine emotions, far from the toxic complexity of the adult world that had shattered her. It was a healing environment, not just for her little patients, but for herself. It was in this new universe of colorful hallways and baby cries that she met Michael Hayes. He was the chief physician of the department, a man in his 40s with a tired but kind smile, and eyes that seemed to see beyond people's surfaces. Michael wasn't the type of man who drew attention for his looks or eloquence. His presence was calm, reassuring, like an ancient tree offering shade without asking for anything in return. He noticed Laura from the first day, noticed the silent competence with which she managed her team, the compassion with which she held the hand of a terrified mother, but noticed, above all, the melancholy hidden in the depths of her eyes. There was something about her, a reserve, an ancient sadness that time hadn't yet managed to heal. He didn't ask invasive questions. His approach was slow, gradual, built on professional respect and small gestures of kindness. A coffee brought during an exhausting shift, a sincere compliment on a tough decision she'd made, a casual conversation about a book or a movie. They grew close slowly, like two survivors from different shipwrecks, meeting on a deserted island, recognizing in each other the same language of loss and survival. While Laura's life began to bloom in new soil, David's turned into a swamp. He was discharged from the hospital and returned to an apartment that was a mausoleum of his past life. The silence greeted him at the door, The emptiness echoed in every room. Laura's clothes were gone from the closet, her perfumes from the bathroom, her presents from the bed that now seemed too big and cold. The note with the white lilies was still on his nightstand, a death sentence for his marriage, written with an elegance that disarmed him. And there was Jessica. After being discharged, she vanished. The truth about the accident and the nature of her relationship with David spread through the condo building like wildfire. The forced kindnesses of neighbors turned into looks of disapproval, the smiles into malicious whispers in the hallways. Jessica, unable to bear the ostracism and the shame of being the other in a story that ended in disaster, simply packed her bags and left the city, leaving David behind to bear the social consequences of their actions alone. He who had always been the controlled man, the respected accountant, became the adulterer of 902, the man everyone averted their eyes from in the elevator. The loneliness was a punishment far crueler than any confrontation. David tried calling Laura dozens, hundreds of times. The calls went straight to voicemail. He sent long, desperate emails, a mix of apologies, justifications, and pleas, but they remained unanswered, lost in a digital abyss. He didn't know where she lived, where she worked. She had erased herself from his life with the precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. Months passed. David's leg healed, but the wound to his ego and social life festered. He lost control, composure, the facade of a successful man he'd worked so hard to maintain. One day, driven by a desperation bordering on madness, he discovered through an old mutual colleague where Laura was working. With an expensive bouquet of flowers in hand, he went to the hospital, a last and pathetic attempt to rewrite the story's end. He saw her from afar in the hospital's inner courtyard during lunch hour. She was laughing, a genuine, light laugh that he hadn't heard in years. She wasn't alone. Beside her was Michael Hayes. They weren't touching. There was nothing overtly romantic, but the intimacy between them was palpable in the way they talked, in the way her eyes sparkled listening to him. It was then that Michael said something and extended his hand, inviting her to go to lunch. Laura smiled, a smile that lit up her whole face, and accepted. In that exact moment, David, standing on the other side of the courtyard with his useless flowers, understood. He hadn't lost her to that man. He'd lost her long before, in every silent night, in every whispered lie, in every moment he made her feel invisible. That doctor wasn't the cause of their end. He was the consequence of his choices. Watching her walk away, her silhouette disappearing beside another man, David felt the crushing weight of his loss. He hadn't lost just a wife. He'd lost her peace, her light, the part of himself that only existed when reflected in her eyes. And that was a loss from which he would never ever recover. Time, which had once been an enemy, a countdown to the implosion of her life, became Laura's greatest ally. It didn't heal the wound. Wounds like that never fully scar. But it taught her to live with the mark, to transform it not into a symbol of pain, but a map of her own strength. 2 years had passed since the night she ran to the hospital expecting to find the love of her life dead in an accident, and instead found herself. The life she built since then wasn't a continuation of the previous one, but an entirely new existence, planted in different soil, nourished by different light. The relationship with Michael blossomed with the serene beauty of things not rushed. It wasn't the feverish and possessive passion she'd mistaken for love in her youth, but something much deeper. A partnership based on mutual admiration, comfortable silences, and the simple joy of sharing life's weight and lightness. He loved the woman she was, not the idea of who she should be. He loved her strength, which he saw not in grand gestures, but in the calm with which she faced the daily chaos of pediatrics, and he loved her vulnerability, which she revealed not in tears, but in rare moments when her gaze lost itself on the horizon, revisiting a past he never pressed her to name. The conclusion of this journey doesn't unfold in a dramatic setting, but in the most sublime of banalities. An autumn afternoon, the sky painted in shades of orange and violet. Laura and Michael walk hand in hand through a park, dry leaves crunching under their feet. There's no important conversation, just each other's presence. At one point, they stop near a lake, where some children are throwing bread to the ducks. A girl, no more than 5, trips and falls, starting to cry more from the scare than the pain. Before Michael, the pediatrician, could react, Laura approaches with the calm that had become her signature. She doesn't lift her. She kneels beside her, getting to the same level, and says in a low voice, "That was a scare, wasn't it? The ground sometimes surprises us." The girl, between sobs, nods. Laura continues, "You know what we do when the ground knocks us down. We take a deep breath, like this, and then use all our strength to get up again, a little stronger than before." She helps the girl stand, dusts off her knees, and with a smile, sends her back to her parents. Michael watches the scene, and the love in his eyes is a declaration more powerful than any poem. He didn't see a nurse or his partner. He saw Laura's essence, the woman who turned her own fall into wisdom to teach others how to rise. The golden sunset bathes Laura's face as they resume their walk. She doesn't look younger nor free of worries. On the contrary, there are fine lines of experience on her face, the depth of someone who's known pain up close. But above all, there's an unshakable peace, a serenity that comes not from the absence of problems, but from the certainty that she's capable of facing them. She's no longer a victim of someone else's story. She's the sovereign author of her own. In another part of the city, in his impeccably clean but sterile apartment like a hotel room, David looks out the window, watching the same sunset. He'd rebuilt himself financially, changed jobs, but his soul remains in ruins. His cell phone vibrates. It's a calendar alert that he, in some act of masochism or forgetfulness, never deleted. Wedding anniversary, 13 years. A bitter, empty smile touches his lips. He doesn't feel anger, not even sadness. He feels only the ghostly weight of a life that could have been, a happiness he'd held in his hands and let slip through his fingers out of pure neglect. He didn't lose Laura to an accident or to another man. He lost her to himself. She ran to that hospital thinking the love of her life had died in an accident. But that night, under the cold lights of truth, she discovered that what died was the illusion. And sometimes, the death of a beautiful lie isn't a tragedy. It's the birth of a lifetime of truth. What did you think of this story? From 0 to 10, what grade would you give? Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to receive all our stories. And click here to watch another amazing story. Thank you and see you next time.